Have you ever had employees Googling to find free tools or websites that are clearly things you thought they should know to avoid? Well, in this session of the live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, our panel is going to dig into the problem of employees using free stuff from the internet. Welcome to the live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, the best part of your security week. I'm Scott Wright, the Security Awareness Engagement Guy, and this is session number 35 for January 10th, 2024. I'm joined by an amazing panel whom Ryan is going to introduce in a moment. But first, we need to let you know that Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is brought to you by ClickArmor, which is the first interactive security training platform designed specifically to make remediation, role-based security training, and custom training content easy and cost-effective. So for those of you who haven't attended a CSAF before, just a few housekeeping details. We like to have attendees type into the chat where you're joining us from around the world so we can get an idea of what kind of international participation we have today. And it also helps you get used to entering stuff into the chat. So we want to encourage people to please join the conversation whenever you feel like asking something or making a comment. You might also be interested in knowing that, just to put this up here, we do a lot of stuff with the content from these sessions. We record it, we do transcripts, we do a blog post usually, or a few, and then we turn it into a report we call the CISO report on security awareness. So that has lots of valuable insights. We do that quarterly. So please do engage with our content, share it with the people to help them as well. Now I'm going to ask Ryan to introduce himself as well as the panelists we have for today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first CSAF of 2024. I hope you all had a great holiday season, and welcome to the new year. Thank you to our panel for joining us today. We've got three exciting panelists I'd love to introduce you to. First off, we have Thea, is a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. In her current role as Director of Research for Praxis Security Labs, Tia now works on applying her experience to cybersecurity scenarios surrounding the human element. Thank you for being here today. Next up, we've got Fletus. Fletus is a seasoned IT and security professional, currently a security operations manager. Beyond his expertise, he finds immense joy in sharing his passion for cybersecurity with others. Thank you for being here today, Fletus. Good to see you again. And finally, we have Jim. Jim is a 20-year vet in the information technology and information security field, who has been worked for or with many different organizations in many different industries. He's currently a senior vice president of digital security operations and hosts a weekly cybersecurity news podcast. So thanks for joining us, Jim. Great to see you again. I'm Ryan from ClickArmor, and I'll hand it back over to Scott to kick things off.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Let's get into the meat of our session today. What I like to do typically is start with some context, just my own thoughts and observations. We all know that people like to find shortcuts to get through their day. And so if they don't remember that there are security rules and procedures to follow, it's very possible they might just take it upon themselves to do things like Googling their problems away without thinking about the organization and how the prescribed rules might exist there that they should be following. So we hope that they'll remember the training that they took and the acceptable use policies that you've pointed to, but there's always a risk that they might go rogue. So I put together a couple of slides of just some lists. So I'm putting down my list of the top risky employee activities from free online tools, call it. So free software downloads, number one thing, I'm thinking of stuff like cracked versions of Microsoft Office or other tools like that people find for free and figure there's no harm in using them. Adult content obviously can have, sometimes legal consequences depending on what people are doing if they're downloading. File sharing services could create copyright infringements, among other things. Social media and user-generated content sites might allow people to divulge or expose information that they shouldn't online. Then there's gaming and entertainment sites, things that often result in, what we call malvertising, right? So these ads that pop up and they try and infect your computer. So those kinds of things. I also found one reference to proxy avoidance sites. I haven't heard of that term in a long time since my son in high school got in trouble for trying to get around the school's proxy. But aside from those things, any comments from people on the list that I've come up with? Any others? I'll ask the panelists to raise their hand if they want to chime in. But if not, I'm going to move on to my next slide, which just gives you the other side of things is, okay, what are the top acceptable use policy requirements? This is kept keeping this general because every organization has different things that they want to allow or disallow, but we'll do, in a policy like acceptable use policy or a code of conduct, we'll have disallowed practices, tools, software, websites, etc. But we should also be specifying what are the authorized pieces of software that people should be using, and maybe giving them reasons why, sometimes in the training, obviously, but also authorized websites. We're seeing a lot more, obviously, use of websites than installed software these days with all the SaaS solutions that are out there. But I think there are still software installations that you have to make sure people understand what are safe and what are not. Then there's authorized devices and handling procedures, things like USB drives. Many organizations only allow people to use devices that were given to them by the organization within organizational devices or laptops or computers. And then use case based requirements such as if you're at a Wi-Fi hotspot, you need to use VPN, things like that. So these are the things that I sort of think of as helping to counter those problems of free things from the internet. So with that, I'm going to start our first poll, and then we'll go on to the open questions for our panel. And I'll see if I can get the first poll question going here. So does your organization have an acceptable use policy or rules for employees' use of corporate resources? So we'll launch that one and see how people respond. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next question, which for the panel and anybody else who wants to comment, what are the most common free things that employees search for that can be risky? And if you have any stories about stuff, happy to hear that too. So I'll open it up to the panel. Who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Go ahead, Thea.
Yeah. So I think just in my personal experience, PDF readers, because they tend to be very expensive pieces of software that the companies really don't want to pay for, particularly if there's a limited number of people that need them. And actually, that's something that really, if you don't get an authorized piece of software, people will go and hunt down some sort of free option for it, because it's quite an essential part of their job. The other thing that I'd like to point out is we did some research on this in my previous job, and we found that depending on where you were in the world would very significantly influence which of those things, for example, on your list, Scott, would be most prominent at organizations. So we found particularly in Asian countries, file sharing or using these kind of torrents was extremely common. We were upwards of 54% in some organizations said they would, try and get those tools. And that was because it's very common within people's personal lives in Asia to use those things to download movies and things. And so it was kind of more okay for them to use it at work as well. But actually, we found that wasn't so much of an issue in like the UK, for example, or in the US. So I do think it is also very dependent. I don't think it's like a common global hierarchy for these things, and it's probably influenced by industry as well, I imagine.
Great points. Jim.
So it's funny because the list that you gave of the dangers, I think I've seen almost every single case through my career. And kind of like Thea says, a lot of it's because the company doesn't provide the software or doesn't provide the right version of the software, that they kind of go through and find these kind of softwares and you just download them. They think it's fine. It's a free piece of software. I know we joked earlier, but well, you let me run it, so it must be something that's safe. And don't really realize from a security perspective, it's hard to block everything.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies I've been at, we've tried whitelisting applications. Though I will say in my younger days, when I was in school and I was trying to do proxy avoidance to get around my school's, filters, some of them can be bypassed easier than others. Like, I found that renaming the program to notepad.exe was one great way of getting around the whitelist of the software because it let me run through it. So, I have to admit that even as a security professional, there have been times in my life where I've downloaded free versions of software to get a job done, and it's a never-ending battle because even something as simple as a licensed user actually trying to find at one organization, trying to find a version of Adobe they had, and IT was too busy to install it at the time. They went online, and it was actually a malicious version of Adobe that was actually an ad on Google on the top thing, and they clicked it and they ran it, and it let them put all the information in, the serial key, and next thing we know, that computer is definitely taken off the network for being a danger to multiple people. But it's a never-ending battle because people will do what they need to do to get their jobs done, and they don't have that security mindset like people who work in security where you're constantly worried about everything.
Yeah.
They just want to, I gotta get my job done and move to the next thing, and they'll find ways around it every time. But they know it's an acceptable use policy, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, or you have restrictions. But sometimes mistakes get made and things are there, and you just have to kind of
Yeah,
put that thought on and work with them on it and make
for
them
sure.
understand why.
For sure. Frederick made a good point, and I think it reflects something of what Thea said as well. If people kind of have the impression that things that they think of as free aren't always free, with for commercial use, and even we tend to forget that sometimes, right? In business, so people do need to be reminded of that. Fletus, you have any thoughts?
I was going to second those PDF readers, converters, taking a doc to a PDF. It's easy for people to do it. Yes, Word can now create PDFs, but 5-10 years ago, it would not create a PDF. You had to use a software, so you want to do it. And I want to speak to that personal risk. I've been in companies where they've been fined because they found an entire line of business is using a personal license or a personal issue of and the developer or the company who bought the software decided to enforce their license agreement. And all of a sudden, what should have been like a $10,000 purchase ended up catching them $250,000 that they had to go find because they didn't pay the $10,000 up front. They got them for infringements and then made them license and then backdated their license. It was a sad thing for legal to go through, but legal was able to come in and find. So that's where you get your GRC, your legal team, your compliance teams to all validate your asset inventory. It goes back to your CIS controls. Do you inventory what's in your environment? Similar to Jim, I brought my own version of Visio to a company because I wanted certain things that was in the Visio documents that I had built personally, that I had built, and I brought it, and the asset team found it. I had a valid version. It was an enterprise license, but I purchased it personally because I wanted Visio with the features that was in the later version than what we were using. So that's even a flip side. I had a valid use case. It wasn't a corporate license per se, and I was using licensed software in a corporate environment, and they yanked it. When they did, it broke some of my Visios. I had to spend couple hours, days fixing, and then republishing. So there's catch-22s with using these all the time. We haven't talked about it, but you've got your AI tools out there now. You go out there and try to tell it to write you something.
Yeah.
It'll write you free stuff, or it'll say, give me the top 10 free sites to get this. It'll try to find stuff from 2021 that may or may not be valid. And you start clicking on links from ChatGPT, BART, etc.
Yeah. Ryan, did you have any thoughts?
Nothing, nothing more than
Yeah.
the panel's already reiterated. It's just it could be an endless kind of discussion with the number of ways that we could be led down this rabbit hole.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to just take a moment and remind people about ClickArmor, who sponsors these programs. And ClickArmor does have a module for doing security basics that helps you focus on, the things that people do have to remember. And if you got to remind people every once in a while about these things, usually it's better to do it interactively than just telling them to go do the training or read the policy again. So these are things that we've put in there that I've learned over the last 15 years from teaching security awareness. To get people to pay attention to stuff, it has to be gamified. So if you're interested in getting a demo or learning more about it or being a partner of ClickArmor, either as a content creator or as a reseller, then please reach out to Ryan or myself and we'll help you out. So the next thing I'm going to do is launch our second poll question. We'll review the answers to the poll questions later on. But right now I'm going to ask the question, has anyone in your organization downloaded or accessed something that caused a security issue or incident? And so found a way to allow the panelists to vote on this one. We already know that Jim's got everything in the kitchen sink here, but we'll let you guys focus on that one. And the next panel question is, how can we design acceptable use policies to help people avoid these or beyond? Is it more than just the policy itself? What else can we do? So who would like to take the first stab at that one?
I'll go at it real quick. Somewhere I think I talked about this recently is like sitting down with the user to figure out how they do their job before you write the acceptable use policy. Find out what they're actually doing so you don't get the illustration of the nice, beautiful brick path, but there's a dirt road right through the middle of it. Like it's easy to say this is the acceptable use policy, but you've never vetted it. You've never sat down in the day of the life. We've talked about in the other sessions. What is a day in the life of an engineer, of a talent manager, of an accounts payable person before you write these policies? Because you may have to write addendums for certain line of businesses because they need to use certain pieces of software. IT and security are one of those places too. Where we have elevated rights to do things. We have a slightly different policy that we're held to, a different standard. So understanding those pieces, because if it's just a catch-all, you're going to have violations and you're not ever going to have enforcement because they're not going to read it. Or if they do read it, they're going to say this is a productivity issue and I'm not going to do it because I need to be proficient. I don't want to waste my time doing 3 clicks when I can do it in 1, or 12 clicks when I can do it in 2.
Anyone else?
I'll say I'm always a big fan of technical controls where you can, to Fletus's point, understand the business. It's a weird thing that in IT and IT security, we don't often take time to understand the different business, or what the business units do. But once you kind of have your good controls in place, you design tools to help enforce that. And in using those tools too, I think it's very clear that you need a good way to create exemptions to those policies, or add things to the approved list when they're needed. And they got to be not cumbersome. Your user's not going to sit there and fill out a thing and then attend a meeting with a whole bunch of other, IT and IT security people and business leaders and then make that case. It should be something that's very easy and very quick to do. Something less than like hopefully a day or 2 at most, to get an exception in place and allow that, even if it's just for one user. Because if you make it easy, they will follow this stuff. You have your technology, backing to say, hey, if you're not exempted, then you cannot install this software. But if you make it easy, they'll follow it. And then what I always challenge security people to do when I talk to them is view your network as a user, or generally I usually say adversary, views it. So I need to get X done in my job. You won't let me do it. How do I figure my way around it? Because I do that constantly and my team hates me for it, because all of a sudden I'm setting off alarms for security things. And I'm like, hey, I'm just trying to figure out how I can, get things running that I may need for my job. Because even, in my position, I'm not exempt from any of these things. There's an approved software list that my company has. I have what's on it, and I can't get other things unless I put in exemptions in. So occasionally I'll try to figure out how to break that system and find a way around it. But I always advocate that we make the system easy so users can do it. So you're not, and I've been at companies where it's like 5 levels of approvals from like risk standpoint and legal and IT and IT security. And, by the time you get through it, you're like, I don't even know if I need the software anymore. So it's got to be easy, controllable by software, using like a whitelist. Azure makes that kind of easy for most environments that are pure Microsoft. But like you talked about, we can do that great with software. Websites are a whole nother thing. You can't, everyone always says that, oh, I wish we could just whitelist websites, but no business would ever function just whitelisting a handful of websites. So the websites are still a hard thing to kind of have technology controls around. You can kind of have filters, but overall, I think the process has to be understood on how you can exempt a piece of software if you need it, and for how many people you need it for, and make it easy.
To add to that, I think, again, it may have been a different session, but I thought it was one of these, is like, getting from a 50-page policy to 51-page policies. So when you have a one-pager, you can addend it, you can put approvals, certain policies can be approved at the manager level, director level, VP level. It doesn't have to go all the way up to the senior manager, aka the CEO or the CIO, whoever has the authority to make that final change. That way, if you got smaller policies and procedure policies of 1 page or 1.5 page versus 50 pages for a single one, it's easy to addend. Like, you're not getting someone stuck in a loop because they hated page 26 and they're stuck on page 26 of the 50 page. So you can never get it fixed.
Yeah. I was also going to say this, you guys reminded me of the fact that sometimes policies get out of date, right? And people aren't, even if they read the policy, it may not be correct. Maybe we have made it an exception and we haven't documented it. So something that we do also have to keep in mind from the management side, keeping those policies up to date, not just sending them out constantly to people to remind them. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is another quick poll. I saw people were having trouble seeing my shared screen at one point. I'm not sure if you guys can see it here, but what do you believe are the most risky behaviors when it comes to using free online tools? Is it, I just group these generally. Is it downloaded software like torrents and browser plugins? We didn't talk about browser plugins, so it's probably some fun stories there. Online forums, sharing websites, even ChatGPT, as we talked about, or illicit websites, the ones that cause maybe legal problems with respect to the business. So that's the last poll that we're going to ask for people to participate in. But going back to the panel, what are good ways to allow people to benefit from the power and free resources that we have? I know some organizations put a lot of trust in their people and they aren't, their policies aren't all that prescriptive. So are there ways beyond policies that we can help people? I think Jim might have mentioned, the technical controls, being able to try and limit things as much as possible. But on the web-based side, as we recognize, there's not a lot we can do. Anybody have any thoughts on other innovative ways to allow people to make use of the power of the internet?
So again, this goes back to your GRC places. Do you have a policy in place for open source software? And you bundle in what is considered open source. You define examples, you share examples, you get with your help desk, your senior point of contact, and help them understand these are what's allowed to go through. This is the approval process if someone wants to use one. How do we go about vetting it? And that way it can be added to your software inventory. So if and when a patch comes out, your IT can patch and get the latest version in the software inventory. So when the user B downloads it, they've got the light version. User A can get patched, because without the IT knowing what you have installed, it's not patched. That's the other risk of me just downloading something from the internet, is IT is not patching that software. It's up to me as the end user to go out every day, every week, every month and see what security patches have come out, what application patches have came out for that software. And that can be alleviated if you've got a policy to say, let me know if you've downloaded it, let me know what you're using, how many users are using, can we manage it? Can we partner with you to patch it, to maintain it? Even if it is an open source tool that's downloaded from the internet versus purchased from a vendor and downloaded from a portal.
I think one way that people can do this, or organizations can do this more sensibly, is they tend to be quite reactive to these things. So they suddenly find loads of people are downloading, as we say, PDF readers, for example. Maybe that's a poor example now, but something like that, rather than maybe taking an earlier step and going in and attempting to assess, what are you missing? What would you like to have? What is going to help you make your work more efficient? What makes you frustrated about the tools that we're using? Of course, in some industries, they're very limited as to the software they're actually allowed to use for things. But generally speaking, I would say just taking a more proactive risk to try and reduce the chances that people are actually going to go and try and do these things.
Excellent. So, yeah, I guess, one thing that came to mind there for as you were talking about this was, I remember 10 years ago, and there probably still are sites that track all the vulnerabilities, in popular software, and you could scan them and see if your organization has the latest versions of these things. I don't know if there's a similar kind of service for websites, right? Is there somebody tracking, which sites are dangerous or what kinds of dangerous things are allowed in websites? I don't know if that's practical or not, but I thought that would be a cool thing to have.
So you've got Intel platforms out there. Cisco has it in their Talos platform. PA has it in their platform. Most of the big security firms are doing ratings. So you can go out and drop a URL into their rating system, and it tells you what category they think it is. And they tell you what subcategory they think it is, and they allow you via either a customer or non-customer to request a recategorization of the site.
Mm-hmm.
For those who know here, like I can be an e-com site today, in a week, I'm now a gambling site. But if I don't get scanned or crawled, I'm still recognized as an e-com site for your content filters, your proxies, your secure web gateways, and that's your risk. So that's why like the web crawling that takes place, the manual submissions of recategorizations from SOCs like myself and other IR firms who can say this site has been known, this is a C2 domain, it's been parking lotted, and you can get some of that intel by going into your Intel platforms or just hitting these websites where they give you the opportunity to drop a URL, click, and it searches and tells you what category they think it is.
Yeah, and then from a consumer side, the Nortons and those different vendors have, the browser plugins that will tell you if websites are safe or not and rank them. That all opens a can of worms, because browser plugins, I think, would be kind of one of those things that would be a rampant, way for attackers to get malware and different malicious code into your system, right? Because as I mentioned before, if it's convenient, likely there's a hook. So if it's making our life easier, what is it doing for someone else? And browser plugins, I think over the last couple of years have been that example where they were ramped up and now they're being pulled back. And even Google's rethinking the way they allow access to these plugins. So but overall, I think the communication piece would be the most important part of staying, to Tia's point, like talking to your people, staying proactive. It's like AI a year ago, where we talking about AI in the same sense that we are now, and the threat that it brings, and the benefit that it holds. So I think as organizations, they need to evolve with technology, and I don't know where that lands and whose responsibility that is, but by leading with technology and bringing it to your people rather than letting your people bring it to you, it becomes a less of a threat, because at least you're aware of it and you can plan for it and make it effective that way.
The other thing too there, and not to continue just to go through from the security ops side, is you've got remote browser access tools now. You've got enterprise browsers that actually sandboxes every website, every tab is its own VM. So there are ways, if you've got users who have to do this activity, you can add remote browsing capabilities, infrastructure. You can do isolated tabs and let them pretty much operate in their browser, but never escape their browser. Costs money, but it depending on your business model, those are dollars that you can spend and justify of, I can let you go to any website you want because I'm going to tear down that tab and you're not getting infected, or you're not able to download something outside of the container that you're in. It's a Docker, Kubernetes, or an actual functionless running inside of that browser. So like a Lambda or something.
Yeah, for sure. Frederick made a comment about executives. It seems probably likely from my experience that executives are sometimes the ones pushing the envelope on what should be allowed without consulting the security people, or at least maybe making a directive to security people. You must allow me to do this.
You tell me I can't use my tablet all day long, anywhere I go.
Why do I need a password policy?
And it's funny because I have been in a couple organizations where the executives are the exemption, like a written or unwritten exemption to every policy you have ever put together. Their password could be password one, and that was just and
it was from like 2017, and they do not read the resets, right?
Yeah, and they don't want to be inconvenienced in their day.
That's
it. And so they often are the ones who install software they shouldn't be installing. Those are often the ones who, have like the 18 search bars underneath their browser with all the, Yahoo and gambling website things.
I forgot about those search bars.
I still have nightmares from them because I've seen people with like 18 of them. I'm like, I don't even see the screen anymore. But like those tend to be, always almost a sore point in any organization, that everything we talk about here usually are your executives, your C levels. who don't want to be part of those policies. They want everyone else to follow them, but they don't themselves have to follow them. And it's funny because they tend to be the highest risk targets.
Mhm.
Those are the ones who have, the keys to the kingdom, likely. In fact, an organization I was with previously, our CEO had more rights to the system than I had.
Wow.
And he was the biggest risk, but you couldn't even approach him about putting controls in place. He wanted to work the way he wanted. He wanted to see what he wanted to see, and he wanted to change what he wanted to change. And that was
Did that cause any incidents, or
not why I was there. Thank
you,
God.
you can't comment on that?
No, it's but it was always a big thing. Like I always had to bring it up to the sea level. Like, look, you guys have access more than anything. You have to pay more attention to phishing than anyone else. You have to pay attention to people who are reaching out to you. And that was the only thing I could do, was just continue to keep the risk factor in their head at the time.
Yeah.
But it's some places it's the friends or relatives of the sea level who get exempt from things, and then they just kind of keeps bleeding. So it's one of those things where you kind of need to have the controls in. And if you want to have a good business, you should follow the same rules as everyone else, because I think then it gives you that idea of what your employees have to go through to get exemptions, or to get things turned on, or to be able to access certain pieces of software. And it gives you like a real lived in feeling to make sure that, your security people are not overzealous, and that, your organization can be a little nimble when it needs to be, but not too nimble. But it's one of those things that, it's a hard target to keep going on. Because I think no matter what organization you are in, there's some of this risk that you bear, and you have to try to defend against the best you can. And, even in a good environment like I am now, I sometimes find IT installing free tools on things, and I get an alert and I have to go to them like, hey, can't do this. It's got to go through our process to make sure it's safe. And it's not, not even just from a security realm. What's it doing with the data? Is it sending the data elsewhere? Are people putting in, and especially around AI, are you putting in corporate secrets that are being fed back into, the main hub of it? Is it training off of that data? And like you said, executives sometimes push this stuff. So, I can't tell you one organization I haven't talked to in the last year whose main mandate has been, how do we figure out how to get AI into everything, without trying to understand the ramifications of that? Is it sending your data out there? Can someone else query that data? It's just something we live on. You have to do the best you can.
Yeah.
And sometimes things are surprises from the executives.
Little presents from the executives. Yeah. So if nobody else has any other comments, I'm just going to go to our poll results. The easiest way for me to do that is just sharing my screen. I hope you guys can see it. So this is our first question. Pretty simple. Does your organization have an acceptable use policy or rules for corporate use of resources? 100% of the people said yes. So that's good. Hopefully not surprising. Then question 2 is, has someone in your organization downloaded or accessed something online that caused a security issue or incident? 47% said yes, 24% said no, 29% didn't know or didn't remember. And then the third question, what do you believe are the most risky behaviors when it comes to free online tools? Installing free software, submitting sensitive information, or accessing illicit websites. And we had 69% saying installing free software like torrents and browser plugins, then 56% submitting sensitive information online, and 50% saying accessing illicit websites. That was, you could choose as many as you wanted of these, but that looks like a pretty interesting breakdown. And then we had other potential things that people could have put in, and I didn't see any specific ones, but I'm going to just leave it at that. Anybody have any comments on, those results? What I'd like to do is just sort of focus in on our lessons learned or key insights from the session today. If you have any thoughts, no, I can't find my own thing I was going to share. Let's go back. Any thoughts on the poll results, guys?
I think a little bit there, and I'd love to hear Thea's point on this, and just from the human-centric part, is you want your users to stop and think and ask questions. So the more you build a culture that allows them to be inquisitive, but also knows that they can approach their security and IT team, the better. Because I can't tell you how many times I get an IM, a DM, or an email. Hey, what do you know about this? Is this okay? Do you have I'd like to use this. Is there something else we already pay for? So that you're not adding additional like risk to your organization because now you've got too many tools that do the same thing. So you're not overloading the processes. So just building that security culture and having that dialogue that's open so that they can approach you. Yes, you may be slow to respond, but at least they know, hey, I'm looking to do this. What's your thoughts? And let it be a peer-to-peer conversation, not a security or an IT conversation. As your
Yeah.
peer, I would advise you not. As your peer, I would advise you to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And only use your title or your role when there is a need to use your title or your role.
Always the sounded ground advice from Fletus. Love your comments on that. Something just wanted to let people know on this slide, we like to sort of focus in on what are the insights that we've covered today that could be valuable for executives, for implementers like security managers, or for individuals if we came across any. I also wanted to let you know that we're starting, I just started to learn how to do this, but we're doing YouTube shorts based on the recording of the session. And so you may see, 1 minute clips of one of us talking about a highlight of the session. And so if there are little topics that we covered today that you would like to see in our YouTube shorts, just enter it in the chat and we'll try and make sure that we focus on those. Also like to just review our attendance. I forgot to go through, we've got North Carolina, Ramara, Ottawa, Kansas City, Missouri, Florida. We had Victoria, British Columbia, Denver, Colorado, Toronto, and of course, I think Thea's in Norway. I don't think she entered it, but that's our most international that I can see here. But again, thanks everybody for being providing your insights. One thing I will announce at this point, I shouldn't have turned off my sharing, but let's go back and talk about our next session. So thought it would be interesting to talk about exercising employees' security awareness skills versus testing them. So we talk a lot about assessments and things like phishing simulations, but how do you get people to actually practice? How do you get them to reinforce things that we've taught them? So it'll be interesting. I think we've come up with a few ideas around that that we'll put in our invite, and hopefully everybody can come back and join us next time. And hope you all had a good session today. Feel free to reach out afterwards if you have any questions or comments. So I think that's it for today, and looking forward to having everybody back again in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.